Why is it Western lawmen are so well known? And of course, I just need to say Western lawmen, and you don't think Western world, well, you know I'm talking about the Old West. And so when I say Western lawmen, you think Wyatt Earp, Pat Garrett, countless Western lawmen, stems from the era, end of the American Civil War, 1860s through to about 1900. That's what seemed to be the Old West. And there are all these Western lawmen. That same period of time, 1860, 1900, Australia was a wild frontier, same period of time, same weaponry, same crime, same land grab. Tell me one Australian lawman, from that period. You might know one if you've seen my Ned Kelly videos, but we seem to be that we know of all our criminals, Ben Hall and Captain Starlight, Captain Midnight, Captain High Noon. We know all of them in Australia, outlaws. We've got no lawmen. Well, maybe one day I'll make a video about why that is. But what this one is about is another one of those well-known now lawmen who was not probably even remembered at all until HBO decided to make a show about Deadwood, and then Timothy Oliphant, good actor, got the role of Seth Bullock. Seth Bullock, the sheriff, the marshal, the law, the peace officer of Deadwood in the wild, crazy days of Bill Hickok, Calamity Jane, Al Swearinger, Al, everyone knows Al. So, how much of that was true? I have to say, one of the things I liked about Timothy Oliphant's role is, man, did he know how to dress or what? His clothing in Deadwood, Timothy Oliphant's clothing as Seth Bullock was outstanding. So how much is true and how much is fiction? So first off, Seth was born in Canada. He wasn't American. Not only was he born in Canada, his dad was English from the British Army, said to be a sergeant major in the British Army. Not sure. I've been trying to research that. It's proven a bit difficult. George Bullock. And his mother was Scottish. English, Scottish, went to Canada. Seth was born. So then he moved. Oh, what I should say is Seth's dad got in some trouble with the local authorities in Canada, accused of money going missing. So he shot through. Seth's mum was dead. Dad shot through. They stay in the house as children, 8 children, destitute. And after a couple of years, I don't know how they survived that long. It's not very well explained. But they were eventually, the house was repossessed and they were thrown out. At that time, Seth goes to America, North America, where he has a sister that he moves in for, where he has a sister that he lives with while he's in his very early teens. In 1867, at 18, he's in Helena, Montana, where he runs for a political office. He's not successful in the election, gives him some good grounding, and he is able to, within 2 years, actually be elected to the territorial Senate. So you've got to remember, back in that period, there were states and there were territories, and so he was elected to the territorial Senate. He's only 21 when he meets Theodore Roosevelt and helps in the creation of the Yellowstone National Park. In 1873, at just 24 years of age, he has been elected to the sheriff of Lewis Clark County in Montana. He's involved in his first gunfight at this stage at 24 years of age when he captures Clell Watson. Seth gets shot in the shoulder. He arrests Clell without injury. So that was his first gunfight. Interesting thing about his very first gunfight, where he gets shot in the shoulder and he arrests Watson for being a horse thief, he takes him back to face justice. He is going to be hung. When he's about to be hung, legally on a scaffold, a mob comes to take the law into their own hands. He's already going to be hung. The executioner panics and runs away, and so Seth draws his gun, pulls the lever, executes Watson, the horse thief. Not good enough for the mad mob who want to take the body, and some of the things that happened in that era. You only need to read about someone like Frank Hamer and what happened in some of the oil towns in Texas to know that it's just not good enough that a person's dead. They then want to do even more deprivations on the dead body. And Seth wouldn't allow that. And at gunpoint, he dispelled the crowd so that Watson could have a proper burial. So what's interesting is that happened when he was 24 as a sheriff in Montana. And when HBO made the Deadwood TV series, they used that incident. And you can see Seth where he hangs a guy, but it's all going to be done properly. It's not going to be rule of the mob. So they used that story in Deadwood, even though that's not where it actually happened. So it is around this time that Seth has met Solomon Starr, and they decide they're going to go into business together and open a hardware store. Seth certainly would have his fingers in any... Seth would have his fingers in any business enterprise. He seemed like a educated, sensible man, and it's not long after they start that business that there is the Deadwood Gold Rush. So what do Seth and Solomon Starr decide to do? Are they going to sell up and go and pan for gold? No. Sensible businessmen. They know the money is going to be made in Deadwood from having a hardware store. So they go to Deadwood and they look for property that's for sale. There is one really good block that's for sale, and you can go there today. I'll tell you where it is. So there's only one block for sale, and that block is owned by the town's biggest criminal, biggest brothel owner, Al Swearinger. If you've seen the HBO series, the guy who plays Al, what a fabulous job he does. In real life, Al wasn't quite the hidden heart of gold that Al was. Al was pretty nasty in Deadwood, but with a soft centre that eventually dragged out of. Not the case with the real Al, but it is a case that he does sell them that block of land. They set up their hardware store in a tent, get a little bit more prosperous. They change it to a building. They make a proper building, just like in the TV show. So that's all true. And then, of course, in previous videos I've talked about Deadwood. The big fire comes, burns everything down. So what they decide is by the time that happens, they are so prosperous, they decide they're not going to rebuild a hardware store. They are going to build the most fabulous, luxurious hotel west of New York City. So I'm jumping a little bit ahead when I tell you this, but the reason is because they call it the Bullock Hotel, and today, this day, you can go to Deadwood and you can stay in the Bullock Hotel that is still there, still operates as the Bullock Hotel on the site that Al sold to them to put their tent to start selling way back in 1876. Isn't that fantastic? And the thing about the Bullock Hotel, they wanted no expense spared. The whole hotel was going to be centrally heated. It was done with steam in that era. It's going to be centrally heated. Every single room was going to have a flushing toilet, hot running water, and a bath. Absolutely amazing for its era. In fact, when that hotel was built, it was better quality accommodation than my grandparents' house in London that I visited as a child. My grandparents' house in London at the time, In the 50s when I went there, I can remember it because it did not have a bathroom. You used a tin bath in the kitchen to have a bath, and the toilet was a brick toilet outhouse. So it was certainly a pretty flash hotel in Deadwood. So I said to you that Al wasn't that nice a guy. So eventually he left Deadwood, didn't leave under the best of circumstances, and when he was only 49 years of age, he was found murdered, shot in the head in Denver. So again in the movie, he sees God, he becomes a nice guy, he dies in his own bed, friends around him, and he dies peacefully in bed in the TV show. Whereas poor old Al in real life was not a nice guy, had nothing nice about him. It was alleged by historians that Calamity Jane actually procured young girls in distant towns, enticed them to come to Deadwood, where once they were there they were stuck, and they then forced into prostitution by Al, and that was all brought on by Calamity procuring them. Sort of doesn't go too well with the TV show and with the mythology of the West, but anyway, Al ended up, if you want to say it, getting just desserts by getting murdered, shot in the head in Denver. Another thing that is true in the Deadwood TV show is that Seth did become sheriff. Deadwood was out of control, lawless. And so there were no elections, there was no voting, there was no Facebook vote for me. And Seth, boom, became sheriff under his own rule of law. He only actually did that though for 9 months, because after 9 months there was an election. The governor of the territory wanted an election held, and so Seth put his hand up. And if you know American politics, small town politics, I don't understand it. I don't believe it's right that you get elected as a sheriff, because I think that is rife for corruption. Perhaps my American friends can tell me I'm wrong. Is this why there's such a difference between American lawmen and Australian lawmen and English lawmen? But you were elected as sheriff. Seth put his hand up and he ran under a Republican ticket, and John Manning ran under the Democratic ticket, and Manning won easily, Democrat. It was only for a period of 1 year. 1 year later they had another election. Seth ran again, Manning ran again. This time it was for a 2-year term, exactly the same result. Seth missed out, Manning was voted back in quite substantially. Seth did the 9 months as Sheriff of Deadwood, but his career as a law officer extended through the whole of the rest of his life. He was a deputy US Marshal, then he was made a US Marshal, then he was made the supervisor of the Forest Service, another legal role, much like the livestock agents in Montana in the Yellowstone show. So Seth was a lawman his entire life. He wasn't a gunfighting lawman, and he wasn't a well-publicised lawman from the point of view of the dime novels or the silent movies, and perhaps that's why most people had never heard of him up until the TV show Deadwood. Interestingly, American history, you know about Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders. The Rough Riders were a volunteer regiment that got together to go fight in the Spanish-American War. They went to Cuba, they were volunteers. Well, the war only lasted 10 weeks. I mean, I don't want to offend anyone in America, but Roosevelt gets so much airtime, publicity. He gets so much out of being one of the Rough Riders and going to Cuba and San Juan Hill, and it's 10 weeks and it was all over. Okay, I'll get my wrist slapped possibly by some American historians, but anyway, no matter what anyone says, not only was it 10 weeks, it was so quick that Seth Bullock had already been appointed captain in Troop A of Grisby's cowboy regiment, cowboy volunteers, and they were going to go to Cuba to the Spanish-American War as well. Ended up they were still in training when the 10-week war was finished, and so they weren't needed. But you've got to remember, Seth Bullock and Roosevelt were already great friends. They were great friends their whole lives. Roosevelt did many things for Seth, in promotions, giving him jobs, supervisor of forest services, and likewise Seth, when Roosevelt died, massive monument on a hill for Roosevelt, so significant they changed the name of the hill to Mount Roosevelt. So the two of them did a lot together, and that's why in 1917 we move to now, so Seth's not a young man anymore, but in 1917 he is one of 18 officers. Had you heard about this before? Roosevelt's World War I volunteers. Roosevelt's cowboy World War I volunteers. Yes, they were heading off to Europe to fight in World War I. They were geared up, saddled up, and all ready to go. And the president at the time was Woodrow Wilson, and love to know the politics behind this, but he refused to let them go, and so that never actually happened. But listen, Taylor Sheridan, Taylor, if you are watching this, I'm sure you are, you'll be sitting back at the Four Sixes, kicking back with a beer, and I'll make a suggestion to you. Seth Bullock was part of the cowboy volunteers that were going to go to Europe and fight the Hun in 1917. What a movie that would make if they actually went, eh? Winchesters and Colt 45s against Maxims and Mausers. Anyway, it could happen. I mean, what hasn't Sheridan made anyway? So, last story with good old Seth. You've been brilliant. We've made a few videos. I don't know why I say he's been brilliant. He's been bloody asleep. But leave you with the last bit. Everyone has to die. So 1919, 23rd of September 1919, Seth Bullock, fabulous career. What an incredible businessman. What he and Solomon achieved was phenomenal. I haven't even touched on it. They did sawmills, flour mills, hardware stores, hotels. They created 3 towns, Custer, Spearfish, Sturgis. Where would the motorcycle rally be if Bullock and Starr hadn't created the town of Sturgis? So those 3 towns they created, but even better than that is when the railroad was toying with the idea of coming to the area, they said, hey, we'll give you 40 acres, right of way, don't have to pay for the land, we'll give you the land to run your railroad. At the time when the railroads were paying huge sums for land to run the railway, Seth and Sol say, we'll give you the land. Why did they do that? Because they made a fortune from the business that line generated with all their other businesses of flour mills and sawmills. They are very wise and clever men, made them hugely successful, and it helped create the town, a 4th town, Belfourche. And so that's the 4th town that they created solely because of the railroad. So hugely, hugely successful businessmen. So today, you can go and see where Seth lived. You've seen the TV show, you've seen his house in Deadwood. He really did live in Deadwood, and I hope I don't cause, perhaps I better not say the number, because Van Bruin Street in Deadwood, you can still go to Van Bruin Street, and if you go there, you will see an original house. It's called the Adams House, an original house that was next door to Seth, and it's been fully preserved. It's a museum now. Original artefacts inside, a hell of a thing to see. And Seth lived right next door to that house. And what's sad about it is sad so sad, is that Seth's house is completely gone. And no offence to the residents that live there, but the house that is now on the block of land that was Seth Bullock's, Seth and Martha, what was their house, is now a boring, one-storey, plain brick, triple garage fronted yawn. What a sad thing. So poor old Seth died there in 1919, died of colon cancer, probably as a result of a poor diet, out doing horse stuff and chasing criminals. So he died there in 1919. He's buried in the Mount Moriah Cemetery in Deadwood, and Martha's by his side in that cemetery, and you can go there. It's worth going to that cemetery because you'll see Wild Bill, you'll see Calamity, and you'll see Seth and Martha's grave, all in that same cemetery. And of course the last thing I'll just add, Martha, I'm mentioning Martha. So in the TV show, I don't know why they did this, but in the TV show, Martha was married to Seth's brother and had a child with Seth's brother, and they come to Deadwood and eventually get married anyway. Perhaps that's what makes the soap opera-ish side of the story. The reality is that they trace Seth and Martha romantically back to when they were in their teens, and they were already married and already had a child pre-1876, and in the TV show Martha had a boy as a result of a marriage to Seth's brother. In reality, 1876, when Seth goes to Deadwood with Sol, he is already married to Martha. Martha stays back in Minnesota with her parents, while with their daughter, Margaret, I think. Anyway, been a long video. Have I covered it all? Seth Bullock. Great life, adventurous life, not that well known. Timothy Oliphant played him brilliantly, and I guess the thing that I'd end up by saying at the end of it all is the TV show was good in some places, I should say accurate in some places, completely off the mark in other places, but man, Timothy Oliphant sure knew how to dress. And of course, old Bill, Keith Carradine, one of the Carradine boys, played Bill, Wild Bill Hickok, and of course reverse butts was his way of doing things, probably because of his military experience. We're going to stop, otherwise we will go off on 12 different side trails here and we won't get back till after sunset. Take care. Subscribe twice. Make a comment, that's the main thing. Make a comment. Cheers.